everybody. Welcome to Novellas, the Goldilocks zone of the publishing industry. Is that the final word? Um, I am moderator today. My name is Nino Cipri. So we're going to start off with intros, and we're going to talk about like what that necessary like beginning of a panel question, like what is the thing that we're actually talking about, and then get into some of the little nitty gritty. Kate, you are sharing your content. I don't know if
I
that's what
don't
you're
know
meant
how
to
I did
do.
that. I was trying to paste something into the chat. I'm going to stop now. I'm glad it wasn't anything embarrassing.
I mean, we've all been there. I always get really, really paranoid on panels because I'm just like, I have to close out every other screen just in case something embarrassing shows up. Okay.
Good idea.
Um, so let's start with introductions. Kate, actually, do you want to start us off with that?
Sure. I'm Kate Mariyama. I have a novella problem. She, her. Um, yeah, so my first novella, Family Solstice, came out 2021, and it's available everywhere now. Thank you. And I have another one coming out Halloween, which is a triptych of novellas with Lisa Morton and Lucy Snyder. It's called Halloween Beyond. And each of us has taken, it's basically a Halloween superstore and spooky stuff happens through it, but our stories are all very different. So I'm really excited about that. And then I went and wrote another one, which hasn't got a home yet, which takes place during the lockdown. Basically, I saw a news story that said that nannies had to give up their lives in quarantine with their rich bosses. And so I read a Gothic novella in there. But I'm excited to talk about this today.
Awesome. Thank you. Mark, would you go next?
Yes. So hi, I'm Merck Wolfmore. My pronouns are they, them. My current novella is The Wolf Among the Wild Hunts, which is a dark fantasy, um, which involves the wild hunt, surprise, surprise. And I'm currently working on the sequel and several other novellas that are in various stages of progress. And I love the form, so I'm very excited to be on this panel.
Awesome. And I will go last. So I am Nino Cipri. I am the author of technically three novellas, but these are the two most recent, Pina and Defect. They together form the Littenverse series. I also have a novella problem, like a really, really big one. Not so much with writing them, but really, really with reading them. They are probably one of my favorite forms of fiction. Actually, that's probably the best place to start. So, Merck and Kate. Actually, sorry, let's go back for just a little bit of housekeeping. So, for folks that are watching and want to participate, want to ask questions, it is much easier for me to see the chat in WebEx than to go between WebEx and Discord. So, if you can put your questions in here, it's much more likely that I will see them. We'll have some time definitely towards the end, possibly like during the panel itself for questions. But let's actually get started with the question of what is a novella? And is it more than just the word count? Because yeah, like taxonomically, it's between a short story and a novel, but what does that actually mean? Either of you have any thoughts about those?
Word count is how I see it defined. Having written three in the past 2 years, it feels more like novellas or movies and novels or 10-part series, if that helps anybody contextualize it. You
I
know,
like that.
yeah, it's a very tight like universe in which and what I love is really easy to revise. It doesn't like all fall to pieces when you revise like in a novel. But yeah.
That last one might just be you because the last novella I tried to write definitely fell to pieces.
Really? Maybe it's
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. But Merck, do you
Yeah,
have feelings?
yeah. I really like your movie versus like a 10-part TV show, like a narrative structure that just clicks really well for me. I think novellas are definitely, they're not like just an abridged short novel. They're actually, their own form, but I think structurally I find them more closer aligned to like novel and like structure because you can have multiple subplots or a larger cast of characters than you might be able to fit in a short story. And it's a complete work in and of itself. So you don't have, it's just much more laser focused, I think.
Yeah.
Both
So
of you fit universes into your novellas. I mean, that was The Wolf Among the Wild Hunt and Fina were both like, that's, I totally want to get into that later. Sorry. But it was
okay, I
exciting to
will.
me. Yeah.
No, that's actually a really good point. Should we get into that? Like,
Sure.
I think we should
it's
go
happened right
anywhere.
quickly.
Like, yeah, let's just
Okay.
talk.
So, yeah, so how do we fit a universe of world building into something so compact as a novella? Or, I mean, I guess this also translates into short stories or flash fiction as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, I feel like it's partly like choosing which details you want to include. Like in a short story, you only have so much space, so you have to be selective with your details. And then like novellas, you have like a little bit more room, and I feel like you can sort of allude to more of the world building without necessarily having to spend 5 pages describing your killer trees or people eating furniture or stuff like that. So it's like you have to have specific details to kind of ground the reader, but then around those, I feel like you can hint at more stuff and people can kind of like fill in the blanks, almost like using the negative space between what you're showing and what you're not showing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with Littenverse books, I like world building is one of the things that I've always considered myself not good at. It is something that I'm just like, I don't I'm gonna spend a lot of time like
Don't
trying
want
to
to.
figure out all of the details of this world. Um, and the way that I've sort of found that works for me, somebody who's sort of like world building avoidant, um, is to find like ways that I personally find funny or interesting in order to like flip in world building. A lot of that comes just because of like the things that I am interested in through people's jobs, the rhetoric that is used. In Littenverse books, I've used a employee training video to deliver like the kind of like largest load of world building because I was like, I can just get it all out there. It's kind of funny. It fits in with the story, and like not just like the information that's being delivered, but the way that it's delivered matters
Yes,
so much in that
yes,
scene to me, like because it just sort of sets the tone for everything that comes after. And like a few actual like in like details that are super important to the plot later on as well.
yeah. I definitely enjoy that sort of format of like this is a training video or an information video, and you can do all sorts of fun stuff with that. Like I recently got sucked into the back rooms creepypasta thing on YouTube, and like one section was like this informational video that was intercut in between the scenes, and it was like it's a sort of a form that I just find a lot of fun in fiction, not in real life, but
Well, and I think
No.
that's through character because the character of the store came through in that video, and you know that the store does not care about its employees, and that was like super just the tone of it. So I think
Mhm.
maybe novellas have room for that tone, for that sort of to come in and sort of like the world defined through how the character sees it.
yeah.
Um, and Merck's yours moves between like kind of like mini universes within the universe. Um, it's really interesting. I think there's more room in novellas than in short story to really dive deep there, but also you have to be you don't have room to describe for pages and pages, so maybe it gets more economical on its own. I don't know.
Yeah. And like I liked your point about characters because when I was reading Family Solstice, I really like how all the characters they're keeping stuff from the narrator, and
Mhm.
so there's like this tension that builds between how the characters interact as well as what the plot's leading up to. And I feel like a novella really has room for like you can kind of slow burn and build up the tension of wondering what's coming without like frustrating the reader that it's 300 pages before you find out what's in the basement.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Let's see. What are some other questions? What do the two of you find appealing about novellas to readers? And we're going to talk about like what's the appeal to like writers and publishers, but like I feel like Kate, you mentioned something specifically when we were emailing together, just like I know so many people who really love to devour novellas. So,
Yeah. I know a lot of people now just don't have time or uh, energy for a novel. And a lot of that was during the pandemic. I knew people couldn't do sort of the deep reading. I couldn't do the deep writing. I couldn't write. Not, I'm a big novel writer, and that time I just couldn't get that kind of depth, but I could, chip away at little things. I think for readers it was similar, and a lot of them really like that you can sit down and experience a world in just a couple hours, kind of like you do a movie.
mm,
Um, and people are always talking about books they had to put down or lost track of. There's that sort of through line with a novella that really captures readers.
yeah. I also feel like if we're just going to talk about like the economics of it, it's so much easier, or it feels so much easier for me to like want to invest in a single novella or even like a series of novellas. Like, um, of course, now I'm like drawing a blank. Like the Murderbot series is a great
Oh yeah,
example.
yeah.
But yeah, like it feels like Kate said, like this is something that I can sort of digest in like a single afternoon. It's not going to take up the next. I mean, I just finished reading a novel that's actually like it's Grandmaster of oh God, what is it called? The Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation. It was previously like a web novel, and it does have a little bit of like a serialized feeling to it. But there were definitely times where I was just like, why am I learning all about this backstory? It's very, very good backstory. It's really interesting, and I know that it will become relevant eventually, but like there are definitely times as a reader I'm just like, I just don't have the patience for this right now. And I know that
Yeah.
sometimes it makes me feel like a bad reader. Um,
I definitely feel that. I like when I'm at the library, like, looking through the shelves and like when I see a thinner book and then it's these like giant tomes, I'm like, oh yeah, I can actually, probably finish that one. 'Cause I have a yeah, so like I like the being able to enjoy a story that's a little longer than a short story, but it's not like it feels like less of a time commitment than a novel.
mm,
Just it feels less intimidating to get into a novella than open up a giant tome that I don't know if I'm gonna actually have the endurance to finish.
mhm.
So I have a question for the world, which is like, how come novellas aren't like being sold everywhere to everybody all the time and getting all the promotion? And I mean, I know so many people who that's what they prefer to read. So
Mhm.
when will publishing sort of catch up to that?
I feel like publishing So I feel like writers are, and I feel like publishing is beginning to, like traditionally. And you can kind of see that, I think, in tracking the changes. This is like very much like my reference, but like the Hugo Awards and the Nebula Awards for Best Novella, where you can see that they definitely shifted over from like literary magazines that were like, the few that did publish novella length stories over into like individualized books that were put out and sold through traditional publishing channels. Like this is the second year in a row, I think, where Tor.com publishing swept the whole novella category, which to me kind of like boggles my mind because I know there are so many other like publishers and small publishers particularly that actually do
Yeah, like
publish
Neon
novellas.
Hemlock.
Leon Hamlick has a wonderful line of novellas. I think at least one of them was nominated for the Nebula Awards, right? I might be mis
Yeah, was it Catherine Towers, or is that am I thinking of
maybe.
something
And
else?
I think I want to say that Fahmi Mohammed. I'm not. I'm just gonna like Google this before I
Yeah,
like
yeah.
put a foot in my mouth and
But yes,
um,
I agree. I think publishers should get on it and start publishing novellas.
I know
yeah.
it's like it's a concern if you're doing printing books that like the cost of printing a book and who wants to spend 10.99 on 80 pages when they can get more pages? Like there's a value. Sylvia Garcia did a really good talk on the history of like paperbacks and stuff.
Hmm.
And apparently novellas were very popular before mass market paperbacks came out. As just books in like the teens and 20s, there were a lot more, and people didn't really ask about length. It was just a book. And for some, I cannot remember. There was a reason that mass market paperbacks, that there was something about people wanting more pages for their value or something when they were buying, which I thought was really interesting.
I mean, I think it does feel like if you compare, I don't have a mass market anywhere nearby, but like if you compare this to like a big chunky paperback, also like these are sold and marketed
I
as
have
trade.
two.
There you go.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
this costs like $4 more than this if you're buying a hard copy. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder if it just like it feels like you're being delivered more story. And I know that most mass market paperbacks were very much like popular fiction. Like I just grew up with like two entire shelves of Stephen King,
Mhm.
probably more. Um, so that's really interesting. Do you have a link to that talk?
I don't. It was not recorded.
Oh,
But there is an article she cited that I will send to you later, and maybe Sharon Bartholomew if I get to it quick enough after the panel.
awesome. Yeah, if you can, I think that would be great. Um, let's look. We have some questions from the audience. Actually, this one is like kind of a nice segue. Have you seen more markets open to novellas over time? If there are still fewer markets than shorts or novels, does the time investment on novellas feel riskier?
Mm. It feels riskier to me. I feel like I don't know. I have this completed novella and I have no idea where to start like shopping it, because it's not, agents are always like, I will not represent a novella. So yeah, I think it is a little riskier. What do you
Yeah, I
think?
think, and I feel like it kind of depends more. Are you like looking for more traditional publication, or are you planning to go more of the indie or self-published route? That can kind of weigh the difference, because like if you're doing it all yourself, then you have you're taking on the cost and the time commitment and whatnot. Whereas a publisher, if they're looking like how much time and money is it going to cost them, um, it's like if we can print, like a mass market paperback for about the same price as a novella, and readers seem to get more value out of it, then they're probably more inclined to just stick with what they're doing.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I was actually a little bit surprised at the title of this panel, because it kind of novellas feel kind of like the anti-Goldilocks zone for writers when you're trying to figure out, okay, I've written this novella, I love it, it's
yeah.
great. What do I do with it? Because there are sort of limited places to send it, particularly if you're seeking out traditional publishing. Um, I feel like, yeah, I think Merck kind of mentioned this, like if you're going through like smaller publishers, small presses, some of the like Neon Hemlock again is a really great example, who's just like fully leaning into novellas. But I feel like more often they are either like kind of catnip for, and this is like very outsider opinion, but like catnip in like indie publishing is like the perfect spot,
Hmm.
for if you're self-publishing or if you're trying to put together a short story collection. I feel like you can't have like it's almost like a requirement to have a novella stuck somewhere, usually at the end of a short story collection. Like that's what happened with my short story collection, and so many other ones that I know.
That's a really good point. And that's one thing that's like I sort of comfort myself as I try to find for a home for this is, well, at least it can go in the
Right.
collection. And there are some like contests and there are some journals, but it is a really narrow field. I think really tiny presses sometimes publish them, but it's hard to find, the right places, I think, unlike a short story where you have a lot of options.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. There was sort of a follow-up question. Would you recommend querying agents with a novella or submitting to open indie pub calls instead? I think Kate mentioned this, maybe?
The agents get cranky.
Agents get cranky.
In my experience of querying, they really do not care about the novella you have. They're more interested in the collection or the novel. I wish,
Yeah.
yeah, I wish they cared, but
Yeah.
I think it's
Yep.
just about the pipelines that are hardwired and set up around novels. It's really crazy. I mean, from advertising to like how a press balances itself. This is the way things are done.
Yeah.
Right. And I know there's a wider publishing discussion about, how things are done, and that probably ties into this somewhat as well.
Hmm. I mean,
Crystal Lake, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I even know some novel writers that have a hard time with just like shorter novels that are about 50,000 words, like because people come to novels kind of seeking, I think what Kate mentioned, like the 10-part series, like they want a big sweeping scope. They want a lot of stuff in it. What that stuff is really depends on the genre and the reader, but like it doesn't there's not quite that room or like publishers can't really conceive of like how to market something that's like pretty straightforward and streamlined.
Yeah.
Crystal Lake is doing a Dark Tide series, which is many triptychs of novellas, and that's what mine is. It's like the Halloween release, and I think they were soliciting them. I'm not certain how that all worked for submission. I actually just got asked by another author in the series. But that's one way that they can market like a book, which is a triptych of novellas, which is all around a certain theme. So,
Mm.
I mean, maybe that's trying to get around the how much bang for your buck kind of riddle that bookselling has.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know, I'm bummed about this because like I know that there are open calls for novellas, but I feel like the ones that are connected to major publishing houses, and I'm thinking of Tor.com, and I love them and they publish my work, but like I know so many people who have just kind of gotten like sent in their work and then are still waiting months and months
Yeah.
and months later.
And it
Um,
usually goes to the names when it does get, it seems to me, the ones that I've seen come out from there tend to go to the names that are already, you know, yeah.
yeah. I feel like it's so much easier to publish a novella if you have already published novels or story collections or just have some connection or an in. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's the way of publishing that I hate a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, okay. So we've kind of talked about what's appealing to readers, what can be appealing to publishers. What appeals about novellas to us as writers?
Definitely the length for me. It's like I feel like between 20 and 30K is like the sweet spot of where I like do best in writing long form. Like I can write short stories pretty much whatever length that they need to be, but when I start thinking about projects in like long form, it's that 20 to 30K that just feels like the really perfect spot for like how my stories want to be told, and then just how my brain's like, yes, I can actually fit that all in at once, and I don't have to be like, have 5,000 notes that I will forget sometime. So it definitely comes down to like feeling very much more doable for me as a writer, and I also love the form, so it's like, well, why not?
Hmm.
And Family Solstice happened because I wrote it in a short story, but it had zero emotional impact. Like I had fit the whole story in. I was like, look, it fits. And it was not, it was not working. And so I kind of dug into it a little more. And I knew I didn't want to do a novel about a dysfunctional family because that wasn't why I was writing the story. And that's
Hmm.
what it would have turned into. And I would have been very depressed to write it and to read it.
Yeah,
But in
I feel
novella,
like the novella is the perfect like that story in particular, because it just, you have the build up and then you have like the climax, and then just it's like
right. Otherwise, I'd have to get into
satisfied.
the psychology of the character. It was just not going to be a
Yeah.
happy place to be. Yeah.
Hmm. I really love about novellas is it feels a little bit like there aren't any rules. I can sort of just like lengthen this out into as a short story and sort of follow um, what I think of as like a more one act structure. And like this is kind of going back to like my training as a playwright from when I was in college. Um, or you can do sort of like a 2 act or a 3 act structure as well. And then you can also just get like very experimental with novellas because it can be hard to hold an experimental form for like, 60,000 words, 50,000 words,
Yeah,
although writers do it. Um, but a
I
novella,
salute them.
right? Like, love it. Could not do it myself. Glad it's not me. But yeah, like I feel like you can convince kind of like a larger portion of readers to come along with a really weird format, sort of like experimental like themes or topics or characters. Um, and you don't have to sustain that for like a marathon. It's just a well, not a sprint. It's like a 5K, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and both of you, the structure, I was struck in Merck's world, like mini stories happen and we move into a different kind of part of the universe. And very much Fina did that too, because, obviously he's literally
Yeah.
moving through universes. And that kind of, yeah, I think those structures really suited novella well. And it would have been very hard to keep that kind of motion going for a whole
Yeah.
novel, for a reader and the writer, I imagine.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I could have sustained it much. It didn't feel like it could sustain much past where I think Wolf is 32K, and that was about like I couldn't go any
Perfect.
farther than that.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, Fino was really short for a novella. It was like 25,000 words. And I think I actually like ran into that problem with Defect where I think Defect is a novella that wanted to be a novel. But I had sold it as a novella and I just did not have the energy to write a novel, so I just sort of like crammed it all in there. Which taught me a few things about like how many characters can you really fit into
Right.
a short space, particularly when they all have names that begin with the same letter and they're all, this is a spoiler, they're all sort of clones of each other. Um, okay. This is kind of, oh yeah, this is actually a related question from the audience. How do you know when a project is best suited or wants to be a novella rather than another format?
If
I
it,
mean, you don't?
yeah, say, yeah.
Sometimes it's just like, oops, I novellaed.
I feel like, yeah, scope is part of it, but at the same time, you can tell like an epic 1,000 year spanning story in a flash fiction piece, which I feel like there was a flash fiction piece that did that, and I cannot think of the author or title, um, but yeah, it's like partly scope, kind of like how, and kind of depends on like how many characters can you really juggle in the story. I feel like once you start getting upwards of 5 or 6, it's like that might be a little more challenging,
I always tell my,
especially if they're all. Oh, I said especially if they're all like you're developing them and giving them stuff to do, and then they want to run around and add more plot. And
I always tell the students to write it all the way, whatever it is, and let it, be what it's gonna be. Because, and just make sure the story's been told all the way and all the characters have been heard from, and then decide what form it's in. Sort of like let the story guide you. But then, you would have ended up with a novel for the first one. So
I mean, and I kind of, with Defect, I kind of regret not turning it into a novel. And I think part of the, like, where I ran into the most trouble was like I had all of these characters that I was really interested in. And I wanted to see all of them have like interesting and significant character arcs. And that's harder to do in a short amount of space and still give, enough attention to like the literal main character, the protagonist of the story. Um, and so I think that's where I sort of like ran into trouble. And like I feel like while I was writing that and drafting it, I sort of did want to get in a little bit more into like sprawly world building and like get into some of the characters' past, gets into like some of the like more side characters and figure out like what was going on with them. But it felt like I really had to streamline it and cut a lot of that out. So I think if you know that you want to tell a story with like a large number of characters and you are in love with those characters and want to see all of them first suffer and then grow, um, then you might be getting more into novel territory rather than a novella. Um, I think it is more of that like, does this feel like you're following one sort of single path, or is it really branching out? That was sort of how I navigated that.
It's actually
Uh,
a great question that just popped into the chat about writing a series of novellas versus making it a
mm,
novel.
interesting. Have either of you written series? Because I know I have.
No, I mean,
Um,
no.
Working on it, but it's been a little bit slow going this year, just everything.
with the everything.
Hmm.
Um, so I initially did not plan on writing a series. I wrote Fina and thought of this as like this is one and done. Like my mom bugged me for a sequel, which is the worst kind of pressure. Um, but I was like, I don't want to write a sequel, but I did end up thinking of a side story with a character who I think is only mentioned in 2 lines in Fina and otherwise doesn't appear at all. Um, so that was kind of like one of the main things was like I did not want to tell episodic story. Um, I wanted to like go off and see what other characters in this world were doing. And I think that works out well. And then there's also like I have not read the Murderbot books. Don't like kill me for this. But I do feel like there's a difference between episodic storytelling, where it's like same character or same characters, set of characters who are going on different adventures that are sort of self-contained, versus like really long, sort of spread out, like that 10-part series storytelling, that
Yeah,
there's kind of one main arc that carries us through.
yeah, that's when I was working on The Wolf Among the Wild Hunt. I knew that I wanted to tell more stories with like specific characters, but not in like a there wasn't any sort of larger arcing plot necessarily. It was much more episodic, like there's this adventure, then there's this adventure, and they do tie into each other, but I didn't want to write like some it just didn't feel like there was an overarching plot that makes it like a 10-part series versus a monster of the week kind of show.
Mm-hmm.
And novellas would, I mean, I'm doing this with short stories. I think novellas would work well, having different stories from the same universe and sort of offshooting. I think like novel series have more of that, feel like they might have more of that overall arcing story, but novellas would lend themselves well to just sort of going off with a different character and seeing what
Yeah.
their life is about.
The cat wants to say hi.
Kitty.
Hello.
Um, yeah, I feel like in romance, which is a genre that I am like not very well read in, so again, caveat. I feel like novella series are and novel series as well are like very popular there. I was listening to a talk that Michael R. Underwood was giving over Twitch. And he was talking about like this system that like has definitely been perfected in romance where it's like you kind of find a niche, whether that's like a particular set of tropes or a particular set of characters. It's easy to kind of talk about with romance, like it's like you have this like one family that's full of rogues or whatever, and then like the basic plot of them like finding love in all of these interesting and unexpected places. And if you can kind of like you can hook readers in with a sort of like one formative beginning of a series and then like write kind of like different stories that have all of the same like similar tropes, similar settings, sometimes the same characters as well. And it's a really interesting way of like non-episodic storytelling that is still really um, like extremely appealing to read. And I've done this with KJ Charles's books. She's a romance writer who writes like both like sequential books and then also like those kind of more sprawly stories about different characters.
Yeah, I know. Sort of in the indie horror realm, that I've read quite a few. Like they're not necessarily episodic, but like short books that have sort of a similar theme going through. Like someone writes about like a bunch of different haunted houses,
Mhm.
or they have like a horror world that's being developed. A lot of them started out like on Reddit's No Sleep or subreddits like that and then they kind of just keep growing, and so then you have like links back to these different stories, and then you can kind of collect them into collections or short novellas that kind of interlink with each other in different ways, and I find that a lot of fun.
Oh, the Neon Yang's Tensor series
Yes,
from
yes.
Door.com Publishing is like very, very much that. I just saw the question in the chat, how large is Nino's cat? Um, he's a perfectly normal size. He's like 11 pounds. I don't know. I've never measured him, so I don't know how long he is, but he's a normal size cat. He's just close to the camera. Um, so I wanted to ask the two of you, um, what was the question? What are some pitfalls or issues that you have encountered while writing or like outlining, drafting, or revising novellas that you want to share your knowledge so the rest of us can avoid that?
Oof.
See, I found it like such a because I had written like 5 novels that had taken me down long journeys like of years and rearranging. So for me, it was like such a delightful form. And I find because I started in screenwriting, I find short stories really like hard. And for some
Mhm.
reason, novellas like this is why I'm getting a problem. It's just they're just they're just very whole and tidy, and like then you can tease themes forward really easily because it's not like the sweater that unravels. I mean, aside from maybe your most recent one, that you were talking about, but
Mhm. I was
yeah.
also writing during 2020, so like
Yeah.
who even knows what I was going
Oh my
through?
God. Yeah, no, I had to redo my Halloween one 3 times because I was going to set it in this Halloween that's coming. And then I realized we have no idea what the masking rules are going to be. I thought we were where we were at the time I wrote it, which was the summer of 21. So yeah, anyway.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges I found is pacing because it's not a short story, so you have I feel like slightly fewer just in a short story you might have one scene and just immediately snap to the next scene without any sort of transition because you kind of have a really tight focused pacing going on in a short story, whereas in a novel you might have a little bit more lengthy transitions at some point to help guide the reader to the next segment or whatever. And then with novellas, it's like trying to balance that in between of like keeping the pacing going without overloading like the beginning or rushing the end too much, and because it is its own thing, like just trying to figure out for me like how best to structure it and then add the information and develop the scenes was a really interesting challenge.
You got
So
to do a lot of pruning for sure, especially in the beginning. You can't do all that like slow
hmm
building or, data dumping stands out even more in a novella. It's got to be a very
yeah.
lean machine.
I think one of the things that I also really struggled with was balancing character interiority and action.
hmm
Um, because like I was really just like kind of learning how to like go between the two in short fiction, and like I think yeah, like short stories are a little bit more forgiving. But when it's 150 pages, like I felt it kind of related, like it was one of the things that turned it into a pacing problem for me, especially in
hmm
Pina, which just feels like you're going, 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 like you have so much momentum. And I was really intentional in trying to like find a few places where like the story could just stop and take a couple of breaths, so readers could process that. I don't feel like I managed to find that as much in Defect. Again, because of the too many characters, too many plates like up in the air and juggling, I think.
And you do have less space in which to have sort of thoughts, or the character to have sort of thoughts. They can't sit and meander and think about something for a long time. Things have got to keep moving. So
Yeah, there's like less sprawl than you can get away with like in a novel maybe, where you could have those slower moments, and in short stories you might not have room for that whatsoever, but trying to balance how much to include in a novella to keep it going is an interesting challenge.
Mhm.
I did find myself looking at scenes saying, is anything actually happening in this one? Yeah. Because we don't have room for it not to. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We have a couple of questions. I'm trying to find one that disappeared into the back scroll. Does the story structure tend to follow a traditional three-part structure? So three-part or three-act, tags, pyramid.
The three act for me, it feels more like a three act than novels that I was working on. Just because not in a Freytag way, but in a movie way.
Mm-hmm.
In that, so my family solstice is 4 seasons, but the last season is really an epilogue. So it felt very, very much like what was going on in each, felt very much like three act structure.
Mm-hmm.
I find, well, for me, it feels slightly more like a two-act structure. You're like building up to this midpoint, and then it sort of peaks, and then it rushes all downhill, sort of. But I I really struggle with figuring out how three-act, five-act, whatever act structures work in general. So I'm probably not the one to ask.
Mm-hmm. We do also have a couple of questions about word count. What's the word count on the thinnest financially feasible physical novella? Um, I
Financially
think,
feasible for the writer or the publisher?
well, they're saying financially feasible. So that's a question from Ramona. If you would like to chime in. Oh, and also there's a follow-up question from Ramona of how much do you worry about word count in general? Okay. Ramona clarified that it's from a publishing standpoint. Um, The one, the not like the smallest number I've heard is usually like 20,000 or 25,000.
Yeah, didn't
If
wasn't
you're publishing a
there's
standalone.
yeah,
Um,
I want to say like Bo Boland or no
yeah, Brooke Bolander or
Brooke
Bo
Boland. Thank
Bolander.
you. Because
Yeah,
Boland is Brooke. The
Is
only harmless great thing was like I think it
technically a
was technically a
novelette.
novelette,
Yeah.
so
yeah.
it was a very thin book, but
Mhm.
We
um,
had a question about that when I was judging the Jacksons that year, and it's like which,
right,
does it
yeah,
still? Yeah, so I mean, a word count, like it depends on if a publisher is asking you, like Crystal Lake was super specific about the number they wanted, but there was a good, I'd say 20,000 word spread. But yeah, I don't know what's like a strict, standalone publishing one. Anybody?
yeah, and I think it also would kind of depend on like the formatting that because you could take a smaller word count and make it fill more pages with the formatting and font choice and all that kind of stuff. So I think it might partially be like how the publisher is going to format this to make it fit within a book range that's economical to publish.
Yeah.
And
Um,
sometimes they'll ask for more or less, they'll ask you to cut it down when they finally do accept it.
yeah. With the question of like worrying about word counts, I think it was Kate that just said like the story length is the length it's going to be and kind of needs to be. I've heard like there are other considerations that you can take if you're thinking about this just like really from like a marketing standpoint. For example, my talking with my editor at Tor.com when we were talking about like should Defect be a very short novel, should we try to like maintain it as a novella? It came in at like 39,500 words. So it really was like right on the cusp, and I now feel like, oh, I should have gone longer with that. But one of the things that he mentioned was like, well, if you make this into a really short novel, it's much less likely that it'll get nominated for an award because the novella category is much narrower than the novel category, always. But like, to me, that's like so far down on the list of priorities where it's just like I have no control over if I'm going to get nominated for an award except to write the best book that I possibly can.
Mhm.
So,
But it is, I mean, I do have to say, I read for the Jacksons twice, and the novella stack was always way, way, way smaller. And the novel stack was two sides of my bookcase, just like going up, up, up on the floor.
yep.
So, I mean, if that is the way you think it's something to know.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the idea is like write a novella first and then find like all of the like publishing contests, all of the awards, like all the places that you can submit it to. Um, at least that's my thinking about it. So we are about, I think, 5 minutes from the end, right? We're ending at 10 till, I believe.
Yep.
Okay. So why don't we do the like quick lightning round of recommendations of novellas that we love, and if there are any novellas that are like forthcoming or on the horizon that you're really excited about and you want to give a shout out to. Mark, would you start us off?
Sure. Well, I feel sort of obligated to mention Murderbot because I absolutely adore those. I also just shout out to Neon Hemlock Press's novella line that, like, everything that they've put out has just been incredible. Um, I especially liked, I think it's Steel and Stone. I'm gonna totally blank on the name, but um, yeah, it's just I basically have loved everything that they've put out so far, and looking forward to the fall collection that's coming out later this year.
I believe the Neon Hemlock is also, yep, they still have 4 days left in their Indiegogo. They have, reached their funding goal, which is great for all of us. But if you want to do pre-orders or get some cool swag, I'm going to put the link to that in the chat for everybody. Kate, novellas you love, anything that's on the horizon for you?
It's so funny. It's like one of those things I would have to prepare for. It's because anyway, Brooke Boylander's, and you named the title, it was really good. That knocked my socks off that year. Karen Wilson, Into Bones Like Oil, I believe, was really good.
Yeah.
I highly recommend Athena. I highly recommend Merck's book, Wolf. I'm so sorry. I don't have like the
Oh, that's
whole.
yeah, The Wolf Among the Wild Hunt.
Yes, Wolf Among the Wild Hunt, as really delightful reads. Yeah, it's funny. I'm less good at remembering the ones that I've read. I just know every time I do, I get really excited by novellas. So
Right, yeah. And I would also recommend Kate's book, Family Solstice, was an excellent creepy read.
Ooh, I'm gonna admit I haven't read it, but now it's going on my
and
TBR.
Dries has a new
Yep.
one out called Dirty Heads, which I'm into, and
Oh,
really
yeah, I think
liking. Oh, and
I'm
gosh,
halfway through that one.
yeah, Nothing But Blackened Teeth was great. I reviewed that. See, I forget these things. I'm now like scrolling through.
Right.
Yeah, there's some really good ones out there, and you read them so
Uh,
quickly too.
Merrick mentioned Neon Hemlock, and I definitely loved all of the books or all of the novellas from them that I read last year. I'm definitely looking forward to their 2022, whatever year we're in. One of the most favorite novellas that I have read in the recent past is The Four Profound Weaves by R.B. Lemberg, and it's published by Tachyon Books. Tachyon also does have a novella line. I think their novels and short story collections get a little bit more traction, but Four Profound Weaves is so good. It's a great time to read it too because R.B. is coming out with a novel that's set in the same universe. I know this is a novella panel. I'm sorry, but anyway. So
It's
check
for
those out.
profound
Actually, R.B. Lemberg, Four Profound Weaves.
weaves. Okay.
Yes, I will put the title in the chat. And that is a story that's set in their Birdverse, BIRD. They also have some stories set in that universe that have been published by Beneath Ceaseless Skies. And I can't remember the title because it's long. It's something like Grandmother Laylet's Cloth of Winds, something like that.
Yeah,
Just
I think if you
search
look
R.B.
up
Lemberg.
R.B. Lemberg on either their website or type that into Beneath Ceaseless Skies, you can pull up all their stories. They are all excellent.
Awesome. Oh, and my last shout out for an upcoming novella is The Legacy of Molly Southbourne by Tade Thompson.
I love the first
Um,
two.
that series is real good. Okay, we are out of time. You can maybe find us in the Bartholomew Discord channel in a second. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you,
Yes,
Kate
thank you.
and
This has
Mark.
been great.
Thanks, Merck. Thanks, Nina.